Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the fourth webinar of Conway & Co. Let me just start up the slides. Let me check if everything is up and running. Today we'll be zooming in a bit more on the technology side of things. The main purpose here is to explain how to reduce dependency on development and e-commerce, and I'll take you through it step by step. So first off, a little bit about Conway itself. We're a boutique consultancy of experts in e-commerce, and we mainly focus on three strategic areas. So the strategy, technology, and the data analytics side. A core belief of us and something that we've learned from practice is that every scaling company basically functions as a system with technology as its backbone. And therefore, that's also why we're focused on the technology side of things. So how to enable your plans, but also how to define an operating model that actually enables your company to scale and grow. This is often what we encounter with our clients. So something here on the left is a bit chaotic and the classic spaghetti code, I would say. And then we work together to first understand the strategy and then move that over to a well-organized and good structured technology stack. I think one of our main purposes is that we enable our clients to stop worrying about their technology stack and their e-commerce technology. And we do that by offering independent advice on strategy and technology, as I just mentioned. And a good way to summarize it is that we often act as an on-demand CTO for these consumer and retail brands. Our experience is also here. So we've been digital executives ourselves, mainly focused on omnichannel players like Ace & Tate and Suit Supply. And we're lucky to work with other omnichannel brands currently as well. This is a great example called Pink Jellock. They sell nail polish and they're started online, but they're also rapidly expanding offline as well. And that brings a lot of complexity to the technology stack. So that's a great example. Second example is Lekker Bikes, which is an e-bike brand. Same story. Started online, but now expanding across offline world as well. And we're helping them set up their strategy and also to execute on the technology stack. Last example is Bolt King, also started online, but moving into other channels now as well, from a fully custom platform to something that is more manageable from a best of breed technology stack. Right, that's enough about us. So today we'll be talking about a composable website. The main purpose of that is to enable faster development, enable commercial teams to actually execute on things, but very importantly to maintain quality in terms of design and engineering, and potentially also reduce costs. I think that's a great benefit as well. If you break that up, I would say the goal of not just today of this webinar, but also in general to implement a structure like this. It enables your company and your team to move faster without any specific dependencies on waiting on your design or development team. And you can break it up into these 6 learning goals. Right, so how your commercial teams can actually start launching web pages and the content on those web pages, how to unify the brand experience, publishing new content, and also enabling that it's all on brand, so in line with your visual identity, and then also working with specific teams. As always, like you've seen with our other webinars as well, we always work from an operating model perspective. An operating model is basically like a blueprint for your company, so it explains how the company actually works. And to make that clear, last time we focused on the technology side of things. So I would say that is in the strategy bucket, but also in technology. So how to make technology work for your company, not as an enabler, and not as a blocker. So if you're interested in that, feel free to look into our YouTube channel. We have the third webinar available there. But today we're focusing on a zoomed in version of the technology. So the front end of the technology stack, which is the website. So that's actually the thing that you can see. Last time we spoke about the end-to-end technology stack. Today we're focusing more into the technology stack itself. And then I would say not so much the strategic part, but actually the execution of it. So the more operational aspect of if the technology stack is up and running, how do you actually make it work from your e-commerce team perspective or other commercial teams? So they're the non-technical teams. I think that's very important to mention. One thing to point out, and that's where we'll start off with, is that any system, and as with a system, we actually mean the company in this case, a system moves at the pace of its slowest process. So that's why we'll start on the delivery process of new pages or new campaigns or anything that your commercial teams would like to communicate. An event landing page, for example. And what we've seen is that agility and speed are very key differentiators in digital success. So on the one hand, the speed and agility of content creation, but also getting that content or that messaging out to the world, basically, right? So either in terms of product, as in catalog, but also as in new blog posts, new campaigns. This is all content needs to be shared with the world, and well, the main interface for that is often the web. So let's start with the delivery process itself. Why do you actually need a composable website, and what benefit does it bring? A big problem that we've seen is that the capacity for design and development will always be limited, even at scale, right? So we often speak to smaller companies, and if those smaller companies say, yeah, but these big companies has a lot more capacity, what we've seen from our own experience, but also from our current client base, is that sure, that helps, but also the requirements grow, right? So you will always be constrained for capacity in terms of design and development. Doesn't matter if you're a massive multi-million dollar brand or a smaller startup, you always stretch. So I think this is an advice or a strategy that both can pursue. And the current way of working with an agency is often slowing you down in the ambitions that you have. If you drill down a bit further on that problem, is that each individual page is often custom designed and purposely built. Obviously, you have a general CMS, so a content management system to that. But what we're proposing here is that you actually create an asset, a library of assets you can reuse. So creating pages for new product launches, marketing campaigns, or additional services is often a slow process with a lot of friction. And I'll show you in a visual what we mean by that. But the total design flexibility, giving that to marketers doesn't work either, right? Because marketers are often not designers. So you still need to have the guidelines that are enforced in your visual identity or in your brand guidelines. You want to incorporate them in the publishing of pages. And then lastly, it's nice that it's always in a brand book or something like that, but your code base also needs to adapt to that. And what we often see is that there's freelancers coming in, there's engineers or developers joining or leaving your company. So you also need to adopt this framework and these guidelines in your code base as well. So it doesn't go just for your design system, but actually you need to incorporate that design system into your code. So the problem that you see here is that you actually see all these different types of teams working together, right? So you have the blue dots are the marketing teams, the marketing people, the design team, the development team, and often also a product team. So the marketing team, for example, starts with writing the storyline of the pages. They start creating the content. They need to brief the design team. They need to wait for capacity in the development team. Then it goes back to design. They actually start building the pages. Well, you probably get what I'm saying. You're sort of creating a very narrow funnel of actually pushing that page out, because every department basically needs to wait on each other, right? So first the marketing team should work, then they need to wait for the development. And if the design and development capacity are maybe not in one team, you need to align the workflow for that as well. So as I said, it slows you down and creates a lot of friction, and it basically creates a bottleneck. So the solution there is not just to build a custom website, but to actually create a design system in terms of interface design, but also incorporate it into the front-end code. So that you do that by creating components you can reuse, and that library will grow over time and will compound all the learnings from the experimentation that you do. So for example, from A/B testing. And if your company grows, it's often the case it's just not one e-commerce team anymore, but there's multiple teams across multiple countries or across multiple departments working with that library. And you incorporate all those learnings into that library. So drilling down on the solution a bit further, these reusable components, they basically serve like digital building blocks, incorporating all that knowledge and ensuring the quality in terms of design. And that basically enables commercial teams to break away from the development and design cycle and to create, within the brand identity guidelines, create pages themselves and combine the content and commerce into a full-scale digital experience. The design quality is guaranteed by the design system, and that is also then incorporated into the code. And I'll show you a few examples of that as well. So if you then look at the same graph, you actually disconnect the dependency between those teams, right? So you basically enable the commercial team, in this case the marketing team, to just publish and create and publish the content themselves, but all within the brand guidelines and within the code guidelines and principles as well. And this really speeds up the whole process, because the one team doesn't have to wait for the other team, basically, right? If you break those independencies. And the good thing about that as well is that all the budget that is otherwise spent on design and development now can go into actually into ad spend or into content creation, for example. All right, so that's about the process. Then I'd like to dive a bit deeper into what the difference is between strategy and what we consider branding. And I think it's important to understand, if you look at a web page, how to differentiate it between how it looks and how it works. And what we often tease many of our clients with is that they are really focused on the homepage, for example, right, on the design of it. Because that's often the case. It's the only thing that they can really see. So, and then we often propose to them, hey, are you in this to win design awards, or are you here to sell product? And I think both, I'd say both sides need to be represented, because sometimes you see examples of either of these directions sort of taking the overhand, right? So there's certain websites or digital experience that are too focused on conversion and too sales driven, I would say. Or the other way around, it's too focused on the design side of, and then I would say the drive to innovate gets a bit out of hand. In my experience, and I'm convinced that you basically need to have these in balance, right? So to create a best-in-class digital experience, the branding and strategic side need to be in balance. This means that a website will be very appealing to customers, so that's the branding side of it. But it's also easy to understand and to work with, and it provides a seamless journey. So conversion in that sense is also very important. Maybe a funny example that some people might not agree with me, but like something like Zara.com, for me, it's a horrible website, right? So the content's pretty good. I'm not making any statements on the product itself, but for me, the UX is quite bad. And not just the UX in terms of what the buttons look like, for example, but the whole information architecture is just a mess. How do you get from one page to the other? The UI is very minimal, if you ask me. So for me, this is an example where sort of the branding and design side maybe took over, right? So, and as I said, I think it needs to be in balance. A better example in that sense is a brand called Secret, and they sell wallets. And I think it's a really good example of where they really found a very balanced experience in terms of the great content that they have, still presented in a very clean UI, but they also have some fresh UX patterns that make the whole site and navigating it very interesting. Right, and they really strike a very good balance between the content side of things, so the storytelling and brand, and also the commerce side of things. And if you make that a bit more tangible, I would say, and sometimes this is also to be debated, but I'm trying to really make it a bit binary in that sense. If you look on the UX side of things, we consider that strategy, right? So often it's called UX design, but for me, it's more about strategy. So it's more science-based almost. It feels more functional, and it's often a more objective way of approaching things, right? So on the other side, it's more subjective, right? So it's more branding, more about emotion. So that's about the color sets, the typography that you use. And it's a very subjective way of discussing things, right? So do you like this, yes or no? Well, it's hard to settle on that. On the left-hand side, personally, is where I feel more comfortable, and that's also where we're focused more as Conway, is this digital experience well laid out, right? Can I find what I need? Is the sitemap structured in the proper way? Are these journeys designed and set up in the proper way as well? Do you work with personas, for example, right? Is it a more junior persona that doesn't have a lot of experience with buying from your brand or from a specific category, versus a persona that is very well equipped in that specific industry? So all these things, for me, there's a difference there. And to make that more clear as well, UX is often considered how it works. So as I said, page layout, sitemap, journeys, personas, navigation patterns, all these types of things. And what you see here is a wireframe of a fairly generic homepage of an e-commerce site. And if you then give that more color, you actually give it a face to some extent, right? So UI is more how it looks. So the type of typography that you use, the specific color sets that you choose. Do you use shadows, yes or no, right? So these are all subtle differences that make it very polished and therefore very important, but it's more a subjective, the subjective way of making a brand appealing. If you break that out into separate categories, the visual aesthetic, as I said, it needs to be balanced, and it's quite subtle. And I'm firmly convinced that you need both, right? So as I mentioned, on the UX side, strategy side, it's these elements that make it seamless and usable. So break it up into components, which is the main topic of today. Do you use specific icons to further explain visually what you mean, or to have specific visual indicators? Are there specific signal colors being used? Yes or no, right? So to highlight a specific button or an action or something like that. And that is different from the branding side of things, right? So what type of art direction do you use? What tone of voice in terms of copy? Do you use a serif or a sans serif font? All these different things for me are more on the UI or on the brand side of things. Okay, so that's sort of the strategic discussion around that, and also what type of skills that you would need. If you then zoom in further, what it actually is a website, or how do you compile a website into a full digital experience? And more importantly, how do you ensure the quality across that digital experience? Because that's especially important when your team and your ambition starts to grow. The more people who work with it, from a design, development, or from a marketing expertise, you actually want everyone to provide them with guidelines that everybody ensures the quality across all these different touch points and pages. Our main advice or recommendation is basically to use these reusable components, or to create a library out of that. What is a reusable component? I would say it's like a digital Lego block, right? So you compile them and you can reuse them by non-technical people who are not so skilled in doing that. And I think the main message there is also, so don't design or build a website, but change the mentality or the mindset around it, that you're actually creating a library of reusable components. And that really disconnects the dependency on the design and development team, and really makes the commercial teams, so the marketing and sales teams, a lot more, or the product teams, a lot more autonomous, right? And the digital experience basically consists of pages, and these pages are built with these specific components. And then these components can be reused on all different types of pages. So on your homepage, but on specific landing pages as well. And everybody benefits from these updated components. So if you have a new conversion insight and you update it in the library once, it gets distributed across all the pages where that specific component is being used. So you will continuously benefit from these insights. So that definitely enables you to publish content faster, but it also enables you to run experiments faster. And therefore it opens up a budget that would otherwise go to custom built design or development budget, would actually be opened up for content creation or for paid media. So if you take that homepage that we're just looking at, UX, as I said, how it works. So for example, the card top right, logo top left, these are sort of page layout decisions. And often you adopt certain best practices, because then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Then this button, if that needs to be purple or a different color, well, you can approach it from a UX standpoint, because it really needs to pop from the page. But often the branding department has something to say with that as well, right? So this purple color you see here is pretty in your face. So if that doesn't align with the brand book, yeah, that's I would say something that comes from the UI side. Then the content, so that's actually the visuals, the images and the videos that you see displayed on these pages. That often comes from your CMS, so from your content management system, and that also enables these commercial teams to edit and change those parts. And then the fourth component is the master data. The master data consists of 4 components: product data, customer data, and order data. Because the basis of what a commerce platform does, it basically brings product data together with customer data, which you enter in the checkout, and what comes out is order data, right? So your sales, basically. So in this example, the desk accessories that you see here, that's probably not managed via the CMS, but that comes from the product catalog, right? So that is the category title that is set up in your commerce platform. And if you then look at these 4 components in the full technology stack setup, and if you want to learn more about this specific technology stack structure, you should refer to webinar number 3, because that has a full explanation of how this works. But what we've encountered many times is that it's helpful for especially non-technical or non-digital people to understand how this anatomy sort of works, right? Because this website and the homepage is often the only thing that you can actually see. But there's a lot under the hood there, right? So there's probably a PIM system, so a product information system. There is a order management system. There is a content management system. There's all these different things that you see as a team, but your CEO probably doesn't see. They only see the front stage, only the front end of the experience. So it's good to also explain non-digital or non-technical people, how does this actually work? And if you break it down into these 4 categories, often you get a lot more value out of the discussions you'll have with them. So if you then break up this specific example of a page, you break it up into specific different components, right? So component A is the hero banner, then you have a category preview, then you have an incentives component, and then have a footer. And often this page will probably be a lot longer, but in this example I chose 4. And if you want to add an additional component, a 5th or a 6th, you basically just drag and drop it into the page. And this really gives you a lot of benefits because it speeds up time to market, which is quite essential. It enables non-technical people to actually create and experiment with certain pages. Therefore, it opens up budget. You can continually add new web components to your own library, and you can reuse those components across multiple different pages. And what I'll show you in a bit as well is that it really helps to have the design consistency as well if you work with a design system, and also if that design system is implemented in your CSS, so on the code side of things. Then to move over to how to actually manage that anatomy, right? So within the UX and UI, you have the front end, and then you have your content management part that actually enables you to drag and drop and create a page. But the challenge with many CMSs used to be, and luckily that's getting better, is that they've struggled historically. So historically, I mean 3, 4, 5 years ago, to bring the content and commerce side of things together, right? So an e-commerce site by default is commerce driven, right? So you have pages like your PLP, your product listing page, or your PDP, like your product detail page that you see here. Those pages have historically always been managed via your commerce platform, right? So they inject the content into these pages. So like the image with the guy in the sweater you see here, the price, the product description, all these different things come from your commerce platform. But if you wanted to extend that commerce-driven website into a full experience, you want to do a lot more with content. And then the CMS of the commerce platform became quite limiting. And what we've seen a lot is that for that reason, a lot of companies shifted to a headless structure. And I would say that's not the best reason to go there. There's a lot of different reasons to go for a headless setup. And that's what you see here in option number 2. So it's a more experience-led front end. And what it basically means, it turns the monolithic structure that you have within your commerce platform, which means the front end and the back end are connected and integrated into one system. That's sort of the historic way how it used to work. And then on the other side, you have a more composable setup, or sometimes called headless as well, which basically means the front end and back end are separated from each other. Well, from a pure feature standpoint, that brings you a lot of value, right? It gives you a lot of flexibility, but what often is not mentioned is that it comes with a lot of technical complexity as well. So you shouldn't just choose that because you want to achieve this, right? So if you just want to achieve more content-driven pages within your end-to-end digital experience, that's great, but be aware that it will bring a lot of additional technical complexity, right? So the good side about the monolithic structure, it provides a lot of speed to market, right? So when a company is just starting up between, let's say, 0 and 10 million, I would definitely just try to keep your requirements simple and stay within option number 1, right? Because otherwise you will never be cost effective. You will never be able to earn back the money that you need, not just for the initial investment, but also to keep it up and running. So yes, there are limited features, but that's not always a bad thing, right? So it gives you less control of the front end and journeys, but when you're starting up, that is actually a good thing, because otherwise you will get lost in this technical complexity. When you grow, when you are growing in terms of digital maturity, when your organization is growing in that sense as well, and you free up more budget to actually deal with that extra need for flexibility, sure, then it's a brilliant way to really elevate into a best-in-class digital experience. So next, an example of one of these drag and drop CMSs. We call it drag and drop because on the left-hand side you see here all these different components, and you drag them into the editor you see here on the right. This is just an example. This is Shopify 2.0 editor, which is a great example where I would say finally content and commerce are coming together, right? So being able to manage a blog page, which is very content driven, but also being able to manage a product detail page, for example, so a product description. Historically, that has been challenging, right, to bring those two together. So then it's often the question, is this a more content-driven page or website or a digital experience, or a more commerce-driven one? And then it used to sort of, how do you say, one or the other one, basically. And now there's quite a few really nice options to create these drag and drop CMSs. Another one is Builder, for example, and I'll show you that in a bit as well. So it doesn't, it's good to clarify that drag and drop doesn't mean either or. You can, as well in a monolithic as well as a composable structure, you can always, for both, there are options for a drag and drop CMS. And just to make that clear, from a component perspective, so there's a multiple version per component, right? So a category preview, you can actually have a category preview with 3 components, but also one with 4 components. And that's that library that you're step by step creating. So then, if you look at your sitemap is basically a let's say a visual or a visual of a representation of your full digital experience with all the pages that are in there. And every page is built up from a specific component, right? So here on the PDP, you see that turquoise thing, which is one of those reusable components. This is a really nice way to basically show all the different components which are being used on all the different pages out there. Well, to summarize that into a principle, I think the main storyline here is not to build a single website, but try to build a reusable system, because that will really benefit you further down the line. Okay, so these digital building blocks, if you follow that approach and that vision, it's important also to show how that actually goes in terms of implementation, right? So how it generally works is that you select these different components from your UI library. You style those components based on your branding. So you add the UI side of things. So define what font to use, define your color set, all these different things. And then you basically can start building the pages from your drag and drop CMS. So then to clarify that further, what you start off with is, after your brand guidelines have been set, you try to convert those brand design guidelines into an actual design system. And what I've experienced is that there's quite a few branding agencies that struggle with that difference, right? So a lot of brand design has been done for the offline world. This is really something that you need a UI or UX design specialist to really get into this granular level of detail, right? So for example, a button can have 7 or 8 different states. They could have 3 or 4 different color settings per state. So it's a really extensive thing to do, but you will really benefit in terms of consistency later, because you basically set up a single source of truth for all your UI components, which will really elevate the experience end to end. And a big benefit is that if you adjust it on one place, it will be extended across all pages of your digital experience. An example of that, to start off with a design system, if you don't have a custom designed one, Untitled UI is a great example of where you sort of get a good starting kit, right? So what it enables you to what it gets you is that you can update once and it will change everywhere across all pages, right? So if you change the rounding of a certain button, you change it in one place, it will get propagated across all the pages where that same button has been used. This really saves a lot of time, and it helps with onboarding new people, because you're quite certain that they will always work from this same single source of truth. And if they add things to it, everybody has availability of it. So it has a lot of benefits, I would say. So it makes it a lot more consistent and a lot easier to maintain. Then an important part to make is that the front end side of things, that's what we're currently talking about, right? But the back end, there the composability works a bit different. So to clarify the design system still lives in a UI design tool like Figma, for example, right? So that's where you set up your design system. What I've struggled with a lot in the past is basically how do you get that design system also into your code, right? So the code that actually is used on your website. Well, a brilliant system for that is called Tailwind. So Tailwind CSS. It's as they call it themselves, it's basically an API for a design system, right? So the design system lives on Figma or the design tool, and something like Tailwind CSS basically enables you to incorporate all those design elements into your code. And this is something historically that I had to do from scratch. So when I started working in a new company, well, you make the design system, you incorporate it into your code, but it's always custom for that company. With Tailwind, also combined with Untitled UI, you get a massive leap from like a starting kit almost, right? And to clarify that, how CSS works in that sense is that the content stays the same here. You just change the branding of it basically, right? So you see here simple, playful, elegant, and brutalist. You see it's the same component. However, it really changes from shifting the branding, right? So it goes from elegant in black to very playful in purple. And that's the big benefit of adopting something like Tailwind, is that if you make any specific brand changes, it gets distributed across every page on your site, and you always work with that same single source of truth, which makes it a lot easier to onboard and offboard people, because you're always building on top of the same single source of truth. A last part on that is that Tailwind CSS also has the vision around components. And if you want to get let's say a starting kit for that as well, they also have Tailwind UI, which is basically a set of all these different pre-made components. I think they all have over 200 or 250 that you can get from the start, and you can always extend it with your own components, right? So you have a really good starting point, but every digital experience wants to be unique or has specific journeys. And you can always extend that with additional web components. So in that sense, you always keep building from that single source of truth, but also keep extending your reusable component library. To summarize on that principle, if you update it once, it changes everywhere. And I think that's a very big benefit to have. And it really increases the end-to-end consistency of the whole experience, guaranteeing the quality basically. So we've been talking a lot about the front end, but if you then look at the back end, I would say the composability there works a bit different, right? So the title of this webinar was how to decrease the dependency on development. For a composable backend, I would say that works a bit differently, right? So if you would, and a good thing to understand here is that the amount of flexibility that you need or require or request from your engineering team, it pairs with the technical complexity it brings. So I would say there's sort of an inverse relationship here to some extent. This is a field that's still very much in development, and I'll show you a few examples there. But unlike the front end, a composable backend provides a lot more flexibility to cater when the business complexity increases, right? So when your company grows, so when you go from 10 to 20 million, for example, you'll probably sell across more sales channels. You'll probably sell across more countries. All these additional steps that you take, they increase the business complexity, and therefore you need the flexibility on your technical side. But it is important to understand that it also very much increases the complexity of managing that. So this requires advanced sort of orchestration of all these different microservices, which doesn't really decrease the dependency on development, but it actually increases it. And that directly correlates to the Conway's Law, right? So what our company has been named after. If there is a way to simplify on the business side, that will directly mimic into your technology side, right? So going back to that decision between a monolithic structure or a composable structure, that also directly correlates to Conway's Law, right? So what we've seen most companies be successful with when they go for a composable setup, either front end or back end, It's not just about the flexibility that you need on making a more complex digital experience and having more freedom to build specific features or pages there. There's a lot to do with your team structure as well, right? So if you have multiple teams working on different phases of your digital experience, in the beginning, you probably just have one team that does the whole thing. Later, you'll probably have a separated checkout team and a separated My Account team, for example. And that way, if you then compartmentalize and make it more modular, especially on the back end, that's really where one of the keys when it makes sense to do that transition, right? So if here on the monolithic side it speeds up, and the front end side you can really break it up into these different components, and then the technology sort of gets out of the way. On the back end, that is a bit different because you get a lot more complexity there, right? So in option 1, what you see here as well, it has, I would say, almost 90% of utility value in terms of the features that you would need, right? So every commerce platform has a product sorting feature, for example. So these are all things that are standard baked in components of a monolithic setup. And that is great because it gives you a lot of speed and flexibility until your company, let's say, becomes big enough or the complexity grows so much that it actually requires to further break that up also on the backend side, right? So that you actually have different types of features there. So if you then look at the composable front end where we started off with, what you see here is the front end, and you have that digital experience, which consists of all the different reusable components. That's that library that we've been talking about. If you then connect that to option number 1, where there's a monolithic structure on the back end, so one connected commerce platform. In this case, I took Shopify as a well-known example. All these different services or features that you need from a commerce platform. So, for example, your product information system, for example, right? So it's not a full-scale PIM, so not a full-scale product information management system, but also a monolithic commerce platform. It provides a product management feature, basically, right? Same goes for search, right? So Shopify has a pretty extensive search functionality, but it is part of one system in that sense. And if you then require more features for specific your search functionality or more flexibility, you run into limitations. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to then pull back your requirements and say, okay, for now, this is good enough, basically, right? And that the thing that you get back for that is the lower technical complexity and the increased speed that you have for execution. If you then later get to a certain size where you really say, no, I need this additional complexity, I need these specific additional features from the subcomponent, you can actually break up that monolithic structure into smaller parts, right? So that's this example. So for example, you would use something like Commerce Tools for the customer part, or also for the product part. Then you would use something like Algolia, which is a very extensive search microservice for specific search. Payments would come from a dedicated payment service provider. The content management system in this example is Builder.io, which is also a drag and drop CMS, but it basically connects all these reusable components from the front end into one CMS. And in this way, you actually also create a composable architecture on the back end. But as I said, you should only venture down this path if you're aware of this additional technical complexity, if the digital maturity within your company is good enough to handle that, then you will get a lot of benefit out of that. But let's consider the warning signal that as well, right? It's a balanced decision, and this is often a decision where we come along as Conway as well, right? To help assess what is the best technology stack. Are you ready for this more advanced setup, like a composable backend already? Yes or no? And that doesn't just have to do with the right software selection. It has more to do with your organizational digital maturity, for example, the willingness to invest. All these things are actually more important than just looking at the software side of things. So to summarize that into a principle, more flexibility brings more technical complexity. So I think that's something to be aware of and to keep in mind. All right, that's already almost the end. So to conclude, summarizing these three principles, right? So I think one of the main things here is to keep in mind is, build a reusable system of components into a library, and not just think of designing or building just a single website. That's the whole idea behind this library of components. Then the part where I showed you about Tailwind and the design system, if you put that design system in code as well, it increased consistency, single source of truth, helpful for onboarding and offboarding engineers and designers as well. So that's basically the principle of update once and change it everywhere, right? So that's that consistency you get from that. And then lastly, is also not just about the front end, but also the back end. Be aware that the flexibility that you would require from your engineering team, it also brings more technical complexity. And the technical complexity always comes at a cost, financially, but also in terms of time, right? So it's just something to be aware of. So I think the main conclusion here is, you want to empower your commercial teams with a composable technology structure. But be aware about the decision that you're making here, right? So it's an investment that comes up front, but it removes a lot of friction later. It's just the thing to decide here is when to make that step or make that leap, basically. What it gives you, it will enable you to move faster if teams are autonomous. That's that bottleneck, the problem that we discussed in the beginning. And that really helps if these teams are not dependent on each other, because then it's not the marketing team waiting for the design or the development team. Everybody just can operate in parallel. However, it always needs to be within quality and design constraints, right? So you don't want to have a marketer have full design flexibility to change a font or to move around specific components. It always needs to be within a structured component library. You can select and request new components, for example, but the flexibility mainly is in the content or in the copy, and that is actually the marketer's job. So that makes a lot of sense in that case. And this enables moving faster, and that actually means faster experimentation. The insights from that experimentation go into the library and into the single source of truth, and that really accelerates the whole learning and a better understanding of what works for you as a brand. That's it. So always feel free to get in touch if you're in need of any specific independent advice on technology. But let's conclude that for here today. Let me just quickly check if we have any specific questions going on. No, not really. So that's good. As always, we'll share the recording over video, for the video recording over email as well, together with the slides. So thanks a lot, and hope you join next time as well.